Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another story with Dove. We're going to read on to the second chapter of Blue Moose by Daniel Manus Pinkwater. So, this is chapter 2, and the chapter is called Game Warden. And there's a nice picture here. It says Mr. Breton's and Moose Restaurant. So, now it seems that Mr. Breton and the Moose are partners. There was a lot of talk in town about the Moose at Mr. Breton's restaurant. Some people who had never been there before went to the restaurant just to see the Moose. There was an article in the newspaper about the Moose and how he talked to the customers and brought them their bowls of clam chowder and helped Mr. Breton in the kitchen. Some people from other towns drove a long way with chains on their tires to Mr. Breton's restaurant just to see the Moose. Mr. Breton was always very busy waiting on tables at lunchtime and supper time. The Moose was always very polite to the people, but he made them feel a little uncomfortable too. He looked at people with only one eye at a time, and he was better than most of them at pronouncing French words. He knew what kind of wine to drink with clam chowder, and he knew which kind of wine to drink with the special beef stew. Some of the people in the town bragged that the Moose was a friend of theirs and always gave them a table right away. When they came to the restaurant, they would pat the Moose on the back and say, "Hello, Moose. You remember me, don't you?" "There will be a slight delay until the table is ready," the Moose would say, and snort and shake himself. Mr. Breton was very happy in the kitchen. There were posts of all sorts of good things in pots and pans, steaming on the stove and smelling oh so good, and bread baking in the oven from morning to night. Mr. Breton loved to cook good things for lots of people. The more, the better. He had never been so busy and happy in his life. One morning, Mr. Bobowitz, the game warden, came to the restaurant. "Mr. Breton, are you aware of Section 5, subheading 6, paragraph 3 of the state fish and game laws?" said Mr. Bobowitz. Mr. Bobowitz is covered in a lot of snow and ice. He's kind of like the policeman between human beings and animals. No, I'm not aware of Section 5, subheading 6, paragraph 3, Mr. Breton said. "What's it all about?" "No person shall keep a moose as a pet, tie up a moose, keep a moose in a pen or a barn or parlor or bedroom or any such enclosure," said Mr. Bobowitz. "In short, it's against the law to have a tame moose as a pet." "Oh my," said Mr. Breton. "I don't want to do anything against the law, but I don't keep the moose. He just came here along one day, and he stayed ever since. He helps me run my restaurant." Mr. Bobowitz rubbed his chin. "And where is this aforesaid moose?" Mr. Breton had given the moose one of the rooms upstairs, in which there was a particularly large bed. The moose just fit in the bed if he folded up his feet, and he liked it very much. He said he never had a bed of his own. The moose slept on the bed under 6 blankets, and during the day he would go upstairs sometimes and stretch out on the bed and sigh with pleasure. When Mr. Bobowitz came to see Mr. Breton, the moose had been downstairs to help Mr. Breton eat a giant breakfast, and then he had wandered back to his room to enjoy lying on his bed until the lunchtime customers arrived. Would you like to see the moose in his bed? I will show you. Look at that. That's the moose in his bed. He looks very comfy. He heard Mr. Breton and Mr. Bobowitz talking. The moose bugled. That means The moose has a way of making a call in his voice to make a very loud sound in the forest. That's what it means when it says he bugled. He had never bugled in Mr. Breton's house before. Bugling is a noise that no animal except a moose can really do right. Elk can bugle, and elephants can bugle, and some kinds of geese and swans can bugle, but it is nothing like moose bugling. When the moose bugled, the whole house jumped and rattled. Dishes clinked together in the cupboard, pots and pans clanged together, and icicles fell off of the house. "I'm not a tame moose," the moose shouted from where he was lying on his bed. Mr. Barbowitz looked at Mr. Breton with very wide eyes. Was that the moose? The moose had gotten out of bed and was clumping down the stairs. "You're flippin' right, it's the moose. That was the moose," he growled. The moose clumped right up to Mr. Bobowitz and looked at him with one red eye. The moose's nose was touching Mr. Bobowitz's nose. They just stood there, looking at each other for a long time, and the moose was breathing loudly, and his eye seemed to be a glowing coal. He is one big moose. Look at that. Mr. Bobowitz's knees were shaking, and then the moose spoke very slowly. "You are a tame game warden." The moose turned, and he clumped back up the stairs. Mr. Breton and Mr. Bobowitz heard him sigh and heard the springs crash and groan as he flopped onto the big bed. "Mr. Bobowitz, the moose is not tame," Mr. Breton said. "He is a wild moose, and he lives here of his own free will. He is the head waiter." Mr. Breton spoke very quietly because Mr. Bobowitz had not moved since the moose had come down the stairs. His eyes were still open very wide, and his knees were still shaking. Mr. Breton took Mr. Bobowitz by the hand and led him into the kitchen and poured him a cup of coffee. Well, that ends this particular chapter. And I'm thinking what might be fun for you to do is to go ahead and draw a face like the moose and put bowls of soup up in his horns, in his antlers. You see how the artist here did it? You try doing that at home. Drawing the moose and putting bowls of soup in his antlers. That ends this chapter. As always, I hope you're well. Wash your hands and brush your teeth.